Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Prep Matters Town Hall. It's a bi-weekly webinar series. We're going to meet every 2 weeks and discuss whatever is, at the top of the news in terms of college admissions at that time. I'm here tonight with our Prep Matters president, Ned Johnson. Say hi, Ned.
Hi, Ned. I'm just Jeff. Glad to be with you all tonight. We hope to bring you some news, a sense of comfort, a little confidence going into the next few months. And certainly answer the questions that you may have.
And I'm Jeff Knox. I'm the Director of Educational Planning at Prep Matters. And so we at Prep Matters like to help students and families make decisions about their own education and through the college admissions process. And boy, are there a lot of decisions to make anyway. And with all of the new changes and essentially the new planet we live on, those decisions look different. So we have been challenged to answer a lot of different questions, and that's what we're going to attempt to do tonight. We received many of those questions already in preparation for tonight, and we're going to hit on probably a lot of what's already in your head. But if there is a topic, an issue, a question, no matter how big or small, please feel free to use the Q&A feature in Zoom. What is nice about the Q&A feature is that you can also upvote questions that you see and say, oh, that's a good one. I hope they really get to that tonight, and we'll do our very best to cover everything. But if we don't cover something tonight that you'd like to learn more about, you can reach out to us directly. Our phone number is 301-951-0350. You can call us. We have our emails on the screen here. We'll show these emails again at the end of the webinar, and we'll tell you about our next webinar, which is 2 weeks from today. So with that, let's dig into what we're going to talk about. And the kinds of questions that we're going to hit on fall into these categories that you see on the screen. So we're going to discuss tonight, what can seniors, the class of 2020, expect in the fall? We're going to talk about how admissions decisions will be impacted beyond those for the class of 2020. So our current juniors, which I think many of you tonight are current juniors or you know one. And of course, even sophomores, freshmen, and beyond, because this is something that's going to change admissions for quite some time. Of course, we'll talk about standardized testing. Ned is not only the president of Prep Matters, he is our resident tutor geek, so he's got lots to say about standardized testing and dates and where to take these tests and what to expect. And then when admissions say that they consider every applicant in a holistic manner, and they look beyond scores and beyond grades, and especially now that you see so many schools are going test optional, well, they're trying to understand your story. How will they, if everyone's story is kind of overlaid with a pandemic? And lastly, personally, and as a family, how should we cope with going to college or having a student go to college during a pandemic? So these are the main topics we'll talk about tonight. And let's jump right into the first one. What can seniors expect in the fall? And this is a table, or rather a pie chart from the Chronicle of Higher Education. It's a really, really, really important periodical on higher education. And this is the latest info that we have as of yesterday. And you can see that of the colleges that were polled, 74% are planning for in-person. But Ned, you and I were talking shortly before this webinar started, and what did we say about that?
Well, it's a great thing. Effectively, it's a game of chicken, right? The driving force for colleges and universities is to have enough folks show up who can afford, who can afford to be there, who can pay the bill, who can keep the lights on, who can keep the enterprise running. And so colleges may be forced to move to distance-based learning, as all of them have in school right now. They may have already decided to do that, but they really don't want to communicate that now. They want to certainly be as hopeful as possible to have kids be on campus, because that's really the experience that they want to provide and that your kids want to have. But if they know that it's likely that we're going to have to do this, at a distance for a few weeks for the first semester, they really don't want to convey that now, because we know, and Jeff will talk about this, there's so many kids and maybe some of yours would say, if it's going to be virtual, forget it, I'm going to do something else for now. And the biggest thing that is hard for colleges and universities is uncertainty. Now that may make you laugh because we feel like, what is more uncertain? Could the college admissions be more uncertain for anyone other than us as families? Well, the reality is that uncertainty for college admissions folks is really, really challenging. And so in some ways they're trying to force people a little bit to commit to coming to college next year, even though you don't fully yet know whether that college will be in person or online.
So that waiting to decide sector of the pie chart, that 13%, I wonder if that 74% belongs there too. And interesting, I was just about to make a comment. We got a question on the same subject, I think. California State University system has committed to online. I wonder if that makes up the entire 1.7% we see right there who have already committed to online. And the question that we got just as we're on the topic, do you think that they are just the first system or an outlier? I think that right now they're probably just the first system. There's really no way to know because no one knows what this virus will do. But I think it's a question that can't be answered today, but it's a good one. Whether the CSU system is a first system to make this announcement, or at the end of the day, they're the only one to say yes, we're fully online. It's a wait and see.
And importantly, it's not binary. It's not entirely online or entirely in person. There are all these different scenarios that the colleges are grappling with, and these are, well, I'll let you read through these for just a moment. We're not going to run through all these, but this is from Inside Higher Ed. It's a terrific article. You guys can just pull up 15 scenarios inside of Higher Ed, and they go through these in greater detail. But the key thing to keep in mind here is that one size does not fit all. The UC system is enormous, absolutely enormous. And so there's no way that they could really credibly suggest that we're going to have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of kids really show up on campus, knowing how full the lockdown is right now. I think in California they're talking about a lockdown, shelter in place through June, and the idea that we're going to all of a sudden, 6 or 8 weeks later, have several 100,000 folks moving across the state to show up and live in dorms together just was incredible. And so they want to be real upfront and start planning now, in part because UC is a little bit more like a barge. They're so big they can't change directions quickly. But if you're a really small college of 2,000 or 2,500 or even 5,000, you have many, many more options available to you, particularly if you are a smaller university that's highly resourced. Then you can really make these decisions much more on the fly. One of my favorite things to consider is what's going on with specific student groups. And we've heard that Harvard is planning to have first-year students show up on campus and seniors show up on campus. And I think part of the thinking there, Maryland, same idea, they're going to have first-year students, trying to have first-year students be there in person. And I think part of that is that so much of what we all think about college is those late nights and hanging out and meeting people and the kind of uncertainty and unsettledness that really is part of the formative experience of college. And yes, instruction and professors and all those are important, but really being with other students is such an important part of it. We know that once you kind of settle in the groove of college, that sophomores or juniors or seniors might be a little bit more able to kind of roll with that, even if it's for a month or a semester. But if you said, well, you're just going to start freshman year at a distance, I think a lot of people might step away from that altogether. And that's why I see Harvard and Maryland, and I think a lot of other folks will probably put a commitment into making college on campus be, as much as they can, the thing for freshmen, even if they're a little bit more flexible or fluid with other years.
Certainly makes a lot of sense, and there obviously there are other ideas that colleges are considering. Just to make sure that we clarify a common misunderstanding, in case you're wondering, Ned's example of the University of California is different from what we were saying in the previous slide about the California State University system. So University of California, Los Angeles, Berkeley, Santa Barbara, they have not committed to fully online. It's the CSU system, California State Universities, that have, just to make sure that everyone understands.
Thank you for clarifying that, Jeff.
And some of these these scenarios are really straightforward. Back to normal, a late start, moving fall to spring, fully remote. And maybe some of these are a little harder to figure out. So I'm just going to pick a couple, and then maybe Ned will pick one or two, and then we'll move on. But block plan is already in place at some schools. The Colorado College, which is a liberal arts college in Colorado, and Cornell College, not university, Cornell College in Iowa, I believe, they both already have a block plan, meaning that you take one class at a time, 3 or 3.5 weeks per class. And what that allows a small school to do is at any point, they can say, you know what, we need to change course here. We're on campus, but now it's November. Things are different. We're going to stop this block here, and they don't have to worry about the ramifications of an entire semester being ceased. So that could be a way for a number of colleges to move forward.
My one, probably my son is a senior in high school and just got him into one of those small little liberal arts colleges. And I picture him, the students in residence learning virtually might be the kind of thing that would work better. You know, for again, his school's gonna be about just over a couple thousand people, and I think that would be the kind of thing that those kind of schools could be flexible with, and then they can literally watch the numbers, you know, and you can have everyone's quarantined. Okay, we'll do this for 2 weeks and just see how it goes. I think that I suspect that two things: one, the smaller the college or university, the easier it is for them to be flexible, nimble with this, and then probably also the more highly resourced is a college or university, the more options they have available to them.
And lastly, another scenario that it's interesting, this also has already been put in place by some universities like Northeastern University, New York University, the idea of this like structured gap year experience. And in those instances, NYU and Northeastern probably wouldn't be what's going on now, but for many students, they're invited to attend the university, but their first semester or their first year would be abroad. And that's, I don't predict that would be the invitation for this scenario, but a structured gap year could look like an independent study that you do at home with the support of online instruction from a professor or a small group. And so you're not invited, you're not going to be on campus, but you are going to be a student of that school doing something intensive and meaningful and structured, but at home. So as we move forward, it's interesting to note that the current class of 2020, some of these students were waiting for spring to analyze the decision of the choice of where they were going to attend in the fall. If you are a senior and you're admitted early decision in November and you find out in December and you know where you're going, well then it's not so hard. You're just wondering what's happening in the fall. But if you were if you were waiting to hear back from a number of schools in the spring and you have all these options, but you were not able to visit as of whatever was March 11th, and that was the time you're going to see these schools during spring break. Well, now you are you're having to make this decision with very, very, very little data. It's always little data, but not even visiting the campus. This makes it really hard. And for some students, that is just too hard a decision to make, and they want to delay their enrollment. And in one poll, 11% of seniors nationwide who were anticipating attending college in the fall no longer intend to enroll in the fall. In this Chronicle of Higher Education the table, 1 in 6 are rethinking their decision. And here are the various things that they're thinking about doing.
And there are a lot of students, of course, because of geography or financial resources who exactly that, Jeff, they don't actually look at the colleges in person before they apply. They regional reps come and they spend time online and they read and they research, and then they see where they get in, and then they kind of do a spring tour after they've gotten in to make those choices. And you can certainly understand why some students might be like, I'm not sure I want to pull the trigger. I'm not sure I want to make a 4-year commitment based on what's really a blind date. So I think so for a lot of reasons, you do see a lot of folks saying, maybe I'm going to hold back now. Both because they don't know the decision and this uncertainty is is a good reason to wait for more information before moving forward.
And this all relates to a common question we got that we're going to dig into a little bit more, and that is, oh my goodness, if and I should go back for a little bit. If some of these students are taking a gap year and they are just delaying, they're just deferring their enrollment for a year, they're going to come back, not this fall, but in my fall.
Right.
Is that going to impact my chances for admissions? And we are going to, stay tuned. We're going to talk about that question. But before we do, I think it's really important that you understand, before coronavirus was on anyone's radar, there were significant changes in college admissions that were to impact the class of 2020 and the future classes. And we're going to talk briefly about two of those. The first one you can see is that student enrollment has been trending down. And the biggest factor behind this is actually the economy. The economy for these years you see on the screen until recently was on the way up. And when there are more jobs, more people decide, you know what, instead of paying a lot of money to go to school to get a job, well, why don't I just get a job now? Nationwide, that was a trend. Additionally, there have been changes in demographics with the student population. There are just fewer high school students than there were before. It's plateauing now. It's anticipated that it'll actually decrease. So Ned, if I'm a college and I see student enrollment going this direction, what's going through my head?
Well, there are a bunch of things. I mean, it becomes this competition for fewer and fewer choices. The other big change has, up until really last 2 years, has been more and more colleges and universities looking for students from overseas. And certainly that's been a big driver in the competitiveness. I mean, American universities that are considered, a premium brand, particularly when you think of the highly selective universities. In 2016, somewhere between 11 and 12% of students enrolled at Ivy League universities were foreign students. Well, partly because of the political change in political climate and immigration, and now goodness knows with this coronavirus, it's going to drop that to basically zero. So it's really interesting to try to figure out where this is all going to settle, because if you have 11% of students at particularly at highly selective colleges no longer being here, boy, that's a whole lot more openings. On the other hand, if you have folks who would have gone into the workforce or pursue other options. And more often those are probably not people who are deciding between Harvard, and a job that maybe someplace a little bit less selective. But when you do have more people pouring back into the system, the whole thing goes back to that uncertainty that colleges and universities are trying to figure out. And so if we just keep thinking about it, when you think about it as a student applying to college, rather than thinking it's purely about yourself, you can think about what are the forces, what are the institutional priorities of colleges and universities. That's the most helpful way for you to make decisions that put you in the best position as an applicant to any of these fine institutions.
That is really good advice. Thinking from the perspective of the college itself, what are its institutional goals, and how can you align your application and your story to in an authentic manner, of course, show them that you can help them meet their goals.
Right, and a big part of this is, we'll get around to is sort of show me the money. The colleges and universities need to have enough people showing up whom they know will show up, whom they know can afford to pay the tuition, because enrollments are the lifeblood of colleges and universities. Without those enrollments, they can't pursue any other institutional objective. They need people to show up, and they need people to pay to keep the lights on.
Another significant event that happened in the fall was a Department of Justice case that had to do with antitrust laws and the National Association of College Admission Counseling. The Department of Justice came in and said, I don't know if what you guys are doing, college admissions offices, is actually allowed. For example, it used to be true that colleges were in no way allowed to incentivize students to apply early decision. For example, a college was not allowed to say, hey, if you apply early decision, we'll give you first dibs on housing, or we'll take $10,000 off the tuition if you're admitted. It is now okay to do that. It used to not be allowed that colleges coerce students into a choice by using some of those same incentives, whether they're applying early decision or not. And just by the way, in case you're wondering, early decision is that binding agreement. Colleges were not allowed to knowingly recruit students who had already been admitted elsewhere. And the way we knew colleges knew that students were admitted elsewhere is that May 1st is the national reply date. It's the national college decision day. After May 1st, you could assume a student's either not going to college because they've chosen not to, or they've made their decision. And with the exception of wait lists, a college could not go to you on May 2nd and say, it looks like you didn't choose us, but can we sweeten the deal? And if we do, will you come to us now? Now they can do that. And colleges are not allowed, or were not allowed, to solicit transfer applications from the previous year applicants. So saying, we couldn't take you last year, but we could take you now as a sophomore. Interested? I know you were last year. And this was never allowed before. This came down in the fall and it is directly impacting the class of 2020, the high school class of 2020. And that was supposed to be the big news this summer. It's still big news, but of course it's been overshadowed by the coronavirus, which all of this together has impacted the way colleges have to navigate the decisions they make and touch on some of the questions that you see on the screen here. The first one being, what's going on with waitlists? And I can tell you, we started seeing waitlist movement much earlier and much more frequently for the class of 2020, the high school class of 2020, than in previous years. And it's for all these reasons. Colleges perhaps poaching students, or the anticipation of that happening, the discomfort of not being able to predict an incoming freshman class. And so colleges banking on wait lists more than ever before. And who knows, down the road, I started years ago calling waitlist early decision 3. And I think actually that might be the case one day, to Ned's point about trying to get some sense of control and predictability, which is really the end all be all for an enrollment managers. Can I predict what's going to happen on May 1st? Who's coming?
Oh, and I mean, it's just like, you know, people making a commitment for prom, and then it's musical chairs, and people sort of keep moving up and moving up. And my son was an interesting case in this. You know, he was waitlisted at a bunch of different schools, and then one after the other, from kind of the least selective, if you will, to the most selective, get a call from this, would you come? He says, yes, someone hotter calls up, right? You know, it says, would you consider it? And so all of a sudden being courted by all these folks who, in March said, we're not really sure. The wait list movement this year is unlike anything that's been seen in, I don't know, Jeff, decades. And it's really this uncertainty. I mean, one of our colleagues, Katie Dunn, was just on a webinar earlier today with another guy from Chronicle of Higher Education, and was throwing out some numbers about Davidson, that they had 12 deferrals yesterday. So people who got in and said, actually, you know what, not this year, which means that those folks then go to their wait list and pull people into Davidson who otherwise would have gone to someplace else. And then those people who were committed to, Chapman or something, Chapman says, oh gosh, I thought Ned was coming, and they move down the line. And so it's this constant process of moving of musical chairs, and it doesn't really stop until the first day of college. Right, and so this will go on through the whole darn summer. And we know that we've also seen colleges and universities that have reopened their admissions process. That said, actually, we're still taking people now, that was supposed to be done, January 15th. Very, very fluid.
Yeah, that's right. I'm just looking up. So last year on May 1st, 419 colleges had spaces open still on May 1st, which is not desirable. They want to have their class filled, but that doesn't always happen. This year, 729. And in an unusual move, many schools have reopened their applications, as Ned just suggested. And he also referenced deferring, not colleges deferring students, but students deferring enrollments. And so 2 questions we've received is all these gap year requests, these requests to defer enrollment, and they're coming not in this fall, but in my fall. Is that going to impact me? And if we were doing this webinar a month ago, I would say, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But interestingly, since May 1st, I've spoken with probably a dozen admissions deans, and every single one of them, without exception, has said, we are exactly where we were or we would have expected to be in any other year for our requests for deferring enrollment or our requests for gap years. They have not seen an increase yet. Now, there is a deadline for almost all schools. If you want to defer your enrollment, you have usually until June 1st or July 1st. So if I'm
when are most colleges going to let people know what was going on with college?
So there's no rule for that, but the common timeline that I've heard from a number of schools is that they have vowed to make a decision about their plans for the fall sometime in early July.
After the deadline to defer.
So in some cases, or in some ways, you might think that that game of chicken that Ned referred to is that they're going to wait until the students have made their decisions, whether they're committing to attending or not, and then the colleges can comfortably and rightly say, the time for requesting a deferral is passed. Oh, and by the way, this is what we're doing in the fall now.
Right, and the other thing to keep in mind is that colleges tend to have specific rules for granting deferrals, right? That you're doing it for work, that you're doing it for travel, you're doing it for religious reasons, and a lot of those things. University of Maryland, the biggest cause for deferral is for people taking a deferring for a year to go to Israel. But some of these options some of the reasons why people would have chosen to defer have kind of evaporated. International travel. Good luck, right? Finding that really plum job or internship online. So all of a sudden, doing class, starting college in a way that's disrupted, this is not anyone's dream version of this. But the other options may be no more thrilling than that. So in some ways, colleges are banking on people. Choosing to show up only because the other options aren't that much more exciting for them.
So to try to land on an answer for question number 2, so far not that big of an impact, but just like everyone else in this world, maybe students and families are waiting till the very last minute so they can get as much information, as many updates as possible before they have to pull the trigger and make a decision. So who knows if toward the end of May or the end of June, there will be a flood of gap year requests. One question that came through was, if you are early decision, we were talking more about students who were applying for regular deadlines and finding out their admissions decisions in the spring. If you applied early decision at some schools, your deadline to defer could have been something like March 1st. Might that college delay it to June 1st or down the road? I have not heard that specifically. It's a good question. I would reach out to that college directly to see, because there is no national rule about this stuff. Colleges get to do what they want. Moving on, a really common question. There's precedent for this. Will the early deadlines, early decision, early action, which generally are November 1st or November 15th, will they be delayed? Might they be delayed? I remember that there was not a national edict, but a kind of agreement after 9/11 that the deadlines were pushed. Regionally, you'll see if there's an area impacted by a hurricane, for example, applicants from that region will get a delay for that deadline. But so far, the answer that we've heard directly from admissions offices is that there is no plan to delay early deadlines. Ned, why wouldn't they be more open-minded about that?
It's a great question, and the interesting thing is it's not just been no in a sort of tentative kind of we're planning to have campus sort of kind of cagey sort of way. It's really been a full-throated no. We're not moving that early decision deadline, and the reason for this goes back to what helps the colleges. Early decision, if you have a kid who does that, it's fantastic, because then you're in, you can enjoy your holiday break, you don't have to write any more applications, fantastic. The reason that colleges do this is that if it's early decision, which means if you get in, you're going. If you get in, you're committed to going. It means that they can guarantee those bodies in beds. They can guarantee that income. And that allows them to then start shaping the rest of their class. They have the security of this much money in the bank, as it were, that allows them to then do other things. And so starting that process earlier helps them. If they push that later, it just creates even more uncertainty, and then they're in some ways having to tangle with two piles of applicants at the same time. They want to get that done. They want to know that they've got that flank protected, and then move on to the rest of the process of admissions.
So if you're a junior or younger, really, and you were excited to spend some of your spring break visiting some potential homes, right, colleges, or maybe you were looking forward to seeing something this summer and that's up in the air, how can you get this information if you can't actually set foot on campus? Well, the obvious answer is virtually, and we're all pretty used to that at this point. The Zoom fatigue is real. Nevertheless, this is what we've got to work with for now. And originally, when, early or mid-March, I should say, and I'm guessing the whole nation was kind of just starting to figure out, like, wait, or wonder, like, what's going on here. Colleges quickly moved to virtual events. They had some kind of tour video, and maybe they had some panels, or they swiftly created Zoom accounts so that they could start doing webinars. And now, where we are, colleges realize that they need to invest heavily in these virtual experiences, because this is going, for the foreseeable future, be the way that they sell and market themselves. And so I've talked to the admissions officers, and I can't wait for virtual reality to be the way that students get to take tours and talk with professors. But we're not quite there yet. But they're really trying to plump up these experiences for you online. And so my recommendation is, and for my juniors right now, I'm telling them, one school a week, you do a deep dive, go to the admissions website and look at all the options. They're plentiful, whether it's a student panel, a professor panel, a tour, an info session, even a one-on-one with admissions officers. Some schools are allowing you to schedule 15 minutes directly one-on-one with an admissions officer, which is a great way to get information about these schools. Do that. It's also important to note that demonstrated interest, which is the literal translation of that is likelihood to enroll, is tracked by colleges. And one of the biggest factors in tracking demonstrated interest was, has this student set foot on our campus? Well, now that's no longer a factor. And for a long time now, we've talked about this at Prep Matters for a while, colleges have had the ability to track your electronic activity. Did you open the email they sent you? Did you click on the link? How many seconds or minutes did you spend on that website? Nowadays, did you register for a virtual tour, a student panel, yada, 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 all these options, these opportunities. So not only is it important for your own understanding of what your options are and what a good match would be for you, and you can use that information to articulate through your application or an interview why you know this is the right fit for yourself. If I have 10 students, but one of them has shown a lot of activity electronically and the rest haven't, well, that student who has shown the most activity is likely to enroll. All things equal, I'm apt to pick that student.
Do you suggest things like following their Instagram feed or their Twitter handle or that kind of thing as well?
Were you asking me or suggesting that?
I'm asking you. Is that a bridge too far? Is that a way to engage?
I don't think it's ever a bridge too far. I think some colleges are just more active on those platforms than others. I think it's absolutely one of the tasks you can put on your list of things to do when you're trying to understand your college options. And don't be afraid. I mean, these are people, and we're going to talk about that toward the end of this webinar. That this is a human process. These are people in the admissions office. It's not a motherboard or like a robot doing all this. And so developing these relationships in some cases is significant. And always, it's a great way to get good information And it doesn't hurt to say in a "why do you want to come here" essay, not, "well, you're really pretty and I like your rank," but rather say, "well, I actually interacted with admissions officer so-and-so, or I got a chance to hear from professor so-and-so. And she said two things that really stood out to me." That is much more impactful message to send to an admissions office than "you're really pretty and I like your rank." And so that speaks to number 5. How can you demonstrate your interest?
Right.
Moving on. What about standardized testing? Oh my gosh. Are any of
Holy
you
smokes.
right now?
Yeah, you know, well, part of it, people know that, I mean, most of us, I suspect, know that there's been a big movement towards test optional for a decade now, but certainly been accelerating in the last handful of years. And it's important to keep in mind the reality of why colleges have elected to go test score optional. The emails, the official notice that they send out almost always have the same kind of almost boilerplate points that they make. And some of those are well taken, but a lot of them, remember, serve the interests of colleges, because one of the things that every college is trying to do, again, trying to get people into their dorms and into their classrooms, but also colleges want to keep becoming more and more and more selective. So one of the reasons that colleges have gone test score optional is to just get more people to apply. It lowers the barrier to entrance and more folks go that way. Significantly, even for colleges that are test score optional, most still will look at the scores and even consider them, depending on the college. They're very, consider them very, very highly. There was a study that was done, looked at the criteria for college admissions. And the first thing was grades. The second thing was rigor. The third was standardized test scores. And so these scores remain important for everything from how selective, what's the profile of the school, but also makes it a little bit easier for college admissions folks to make this decision. So the big move that's really since COVID has hit is this massive acceleration in colleges and universities becoming test score optional. So the entire University of California, Williams has done this, Amherst, I mean, lots and lots, and there'll be more of this will continue all the way into the fall. And part of this is because this disruption from COVID is uneven. It's hit some parts of the country more than other parts of the country. It's also hit people of different socioeconomic backgrounds really differently. And so colleges, it's interesting, the movement, particularly among the highly selective colleges, has been, on the one hand, we want the money, we want the selectivity, but also we're really trying to broaden the reach. We're trying to have greater socioeconomic diversity, we're trying to have greater ethnic diversity. And we know that the people with different socioeconomic backgrounds have been hit differently by this COVID. And so for all the colleges that are trying to find, trying to find kids from of lower means, getting rid of standardized tests was one thing that made it a whole lot easier, because if they have no support, if you're in a rural area and your school's closed and the next one is an hour away, goodness, colleges, we don't want you to not apply to our wonderful institution simply because you didn't take the silly SAT or silly ACT. Okay, so that's been the big movement. Obviously, these tests have been canceled this spring. College Board, and we'll look at this in a moment, College Board and AC trying to add other tests. But what this does mean is that while colleges they talk about grace, they're trying to have grace in the process and allow people to apply without scores. One, it's good for students, but also that helps colleges have more people apply. But if you can have scores, but specifically if you can have good scores, that puts you in a much stronger space. Consider this: in a year where you have half a year of grades, no standardized test scores, grades, things are pass-fail the rest of this year. There are no sports to point to. There's no musical. There's no robotics. There's no debate championship. When you have very few things to point to, the opportunity to have something tangible that differentiates you from everyone else who's got a GPA over 3.5. Standardized tests, is in all the ways that they're flawed, and I refuse to be an apologist for these tests. They can remain a tool that allows people to show greater rigor when so much of the grades have been really compromised this year. So Sorry.
That's exactly right. And the way I like to think about it is that the more data you can give a college to help them build a case to admit, the better, even when you're in a test optional scenario. And the test optional scenarios that I think of them in like 3 different flavors. You've got the schools that are going test optional, frankly, against their will. They're doing it for 1 year because they have to, for some of the reasons Ned suggested, and maybe some other pressures. Cornell is an example of that. They're really clear about it. If you go to their website, they frankly say it. They say, you're better off with scores, but we have to allow for test optional.
And they had some very specific language in there, Jeff. They said we're test optional, but they said, if you attend a school that gives you, where you have other opportunities to take the test, we expect you to take the test. And this is really interesting. If you're from a family where you have not had one or both parents have a significant impact to their employment or their income, we expect you to take the test. Right. So, I mean, in very unvarnished terms, if you have no money, you don't have to take the test. If you're of means, we expect you to take the test. It was a lot more naked than most other colleges are, but I think that's kind of some version of the truth applies to a lot of places, in part because for all the schools that are test score optional, there are almost none, and I can't say none, but almost none, that say we won't look at the scores at all.
That's interesting. Yeah, just in case you're curious, that there are 3 that I know of. There might be more. Hampshire College is test blind. Loyola University in New Orleans just announced a week or 2 ago they're going test blind, meaning they refuse to look at the SAT or ACT. And then I think, oh, I'm so sorry if I'm going to get this wrong. I should have said I only know 2. Northern Idaho University or Iowa. Someone listening out there probably knows and is screaming at their monitor right now. I just wanted to briefly touch on the 2 other flavors of test optional, and also answer a question that came through that I think is related, Ned, to what you just talked about. So let's do that first. Will early decision for the class of 2021 strongly favor those who can pay in full? And I think to your point, yes, but it depends, right? We've got schools like Princeton, whose endowment I think people have done the math at a webinar I was at, and it's something like Princeton could go for 12 years without enrolling any students, and they'd be fine. But there are other schools that wouldn't be able to go for 3 months. And Princeton, and I'm just using it as an example, many schools meet full need. So they are very interested in access to all students of all kinds, all types, and a different socioeconomic status. There are other schools that just don't meet full need. I'll call NYU out. New York University is expensive, and they cannot provide the financial aid, the need-based aid that people need. They might need those full-pay students. The other 2 flavors of test optional, so we got the ones who are going against their will. We have the ones who are already thinking about it anyway, and this was just the trigger point at which they said, okay, you know what, let's do it. Indiana University is an example of that. And then we have the kinds of schools who are like, you know what, let's test this out. So we're not saying just for the class of 2021. We're going to pilot this for 3 years. Tufts, Davidson. And it's my opinion that if a college is going to pilot this for 3 years, it's going to be really hard to go back.
In part because if they do that, they erect another barrier and they have fewer kids applying, right? I mean, if you keep going back to what serves the interest of colleges, and keep in mind that it's not monolithic. Princeton could have very different objectives than a place that doesn't have an endowment that's in the tens of billions of dollars, right?
It would be helpful to show this screen as you talk about dates and location.
Sure.
Okay.
So really quickly, tests were canceled. A few people snuck in and got the March test. And that was that was a test center by test center basis. It was not anything handed down by College Board. College Board, of course, has come through and canceled all the SAT and subject tests for May, as well as for June. They're planning to have everything go in the spring, and they've actually added this extra date to make up for dates that were canceled in the spring. Keep in mind with standardized tests that SAT and ACT are desperate to not have an admission cycle go through where most people don't take their tests. Because if you had an entire year with no test scores and it worked out just fine, that would be the single greatest reason for every college in the country to be like, well, I guess we're good. And so College Board and ACT are absolutely committed to not allowing that test to be run. They don't want to see the outcome of that. So this is why we know the APs, if you have students who are in the middle of doing this right now, how the heck do you do this? We'll make a 45-minute only free response done online without actually asking anybody else. Colleges will even accept these. What do you think? And we just did it because there's so much money riding on the line for them with APs that they had no choice. There were my words for them than to do this. ACT, curiously, has not yet canceled the June or July tests. We're just on a webinar earlier today. Originally, ACT said it was going to announce on May 22nd whether the June test would go forward or not. They've now said, ACT has now said, the week of May 26th. So they're giving themselves another week. On this webinar, they said they've been canvassing basically every single test center, the administrator, if they can get in touch with them to say, can you give this test? Again, the reasons that serve students, the reasons that serve the ACT, but they're really committed to trying to do this. Curiously, they've made this seemingly much more of a regional decision rather than a federal decision by not canceling June and seemingly allowing individual test centers to move forward with this. My expectation here in June is that it's not going to happen. Muriel Bowser, as people may know, just announced that the shelter in place will go through June 8th. So it's hard to imagine that schools, the whole city shut down due June 8th. DC schools are ending officially on May 29th. I can't fathom they're going to bring back administrators to administer a standardized test. I think July is a likelihood. If you want my advice about, are you registered for June or you're looking to go for July, where would you go? If it were my decision, I would probably aim towards universities that are giving the test. University of Maryland does this. If you are taking a JDS, you might move to Adventist University, which practices a Sunday test. You're just trying to look for folks who might have the bandwidth or have people in place to actually administer these tests. I think it will become much more likely that they come together when Governor Hogan, Muriel Bowser, Governor Northam start to open things up a little bit. It then makes it safe then for schools to administer these tests a little bit. But I think we'll have something going in the fall. Question about online testing. Colleges are incredibly skeptical.
Especially now.
Especially, yeah. I mean, the AP stuff did not go and went okay, but it didn't go great. And while there's this tension we keep talking about, the colleges want full pay students, they need to keep the lights on. They're also deeply committed to increasing their support for kids of lower socioeconomic status. And the people banging the pans are incredibly against online testing because it puts another barrier, another issue of equity, another issue of access, another issue of fairness, because most of the people who are on this phone call or webinar, likely have the means to have access to things like, I don't know, a Zoom webinar, and your kids probably have been able to have class online. It's been disrupted for other reasons, but not because that you don't have enough bandwidth where there are kids all across the country and even in Montgomery County who really, they don't have the means, they don't have the technology. And so moving a significant standardized test online, they're deep concerned that would only exacerbate issues of inequality. So the chance that would be a last gasp, if all schools kind of across the country were shut down in the fall, I think you see SCT and ACT trying to roll that out. But right now I'm pretty skeptical that that will see the light of day or that it will be widely accepted. How should I prepare for these tests now? Well, for me, it depends what your kid wants to do. I was just having a conversation with someone. People know the 10,000 hour rule, the Malcolm Gladwell, you have 10,000 hours to become an expert. Significantly, it was 10,000 hours, not of practice, but of deliberate practice. And so if you're trying to get your kid to do this work and you're pushing and prodding and nagging and bribing and threatening, just don't. Save your battles. Pick a different battle, because your kid is going to go through and do this reluctantly. And so I would simply say, okay, I hear you. You don't want to do this stuff now. When would be a good time to revisit this? Obviously I've had folks who've dropped off, kids like, I've been doing this forever, I can't. I said, is it okay if I reach back out to you in the end of May when I know you're done with school? And then we'll see how it is and see if you want to pick this up again. And she said, yeah, that would be great, because I can't. Where I have other kids who have been happy to continue doing this work because their school is now pass fail. They feel that I might as well use extra opportunity to just do more practice. So it's really, really individualized. Offer the help to kids, offer the opportunity if you can make it work to do tutoring, but don't force it on them, because they won't really learn that much out of it, and they'll simply resent you for it. If you're working with a tutor with one of us, by all means, I'm happy to hop on the phone with anyone and talk through the pros and cons of how to go about this. But if your kids are inclined, keep giving them support, let them work with the tutor, let them do practice tests. We have practice tests on the weekend. If your kids are like, I can't, I don't, I would let it go and come back to it later, because remember that your kids, all the parents do the contrary. They want to be successful in school and they want to go to college and they want you to be proud. But if they're really fighting you on it, there's probably a good reason for that. And I would wait, because the tests, chances are they're not happening now. We'll still have these opportunities to do these in the fall. AP exams, does the format change the significance? Yeah. First of all, colleges, a college board said, where in the past they graded on a curve and they were going to limit the number of fives, they've gotten rid of that. So now, goodness, take the test. Quick reminder, in case you're an anxious parent and trying to get your kid to study more, quick reminder that the AP scores, you get them back in the middle of July. And if you're like, well, that's a surprise, and in a bad way, you don't have to share it. So kid can take the test, and if it doesn't go well, there's no problem. That might make your son or daughter more apt to do it. I suspect that colleges are going to be a little suspicious about it, because 45 minutes, what are we going to do with this? However, back to what Jeff said, in a period where there's so little data, anything that gives data is likely to be helpful. So I'm encouraging kids to take it as seriously as they can, and that's kind of the best that you can do. Technical glitches. My wife teaches Latin, and her the AP Latin, among other things. And College Board would gleefully announce that 91% of kids successfully uploaded their scores, and the test went great for them, which means that 9% of people went splat, right? And if that were an airline, we wouldn't accept that. It's not great. It's not great. And these were from families that I think that had, sophisticated parents and good IT support if they needed it. Again, I think this is going to be taken with a healthy dose of grain of salt. But if you can do it and go well, go for it. And if it gets blown up, you did the best you can and kind of move on to the next thing. Subject tests aren't, well, Jeff, do you want to take a stab on this? You have a more.
Yeah, sure. It's interesting to also remember that AP exams are not designed for admissions. We forget that they were long ago designed to get college credit because you've exhausted the high school curriculum. That is just not the case. Now, they make good impressions on admissions officers, but they weren't designed for admissions. Don't worry, the College Board figured out a different test that's designed for admissions, and these are the subject tests.
And a quick word on that, Jeff, if you had to guess, my hunch is that the AP in their truncated form would still be used for admissions purposes to the degree that it ever kind of was. But in terms of getting credit, that may be, in jeopardy because it's a whole lot less robust.
That's right. Just really quickly on that, to get credit for an AP exam, the college policy is decided by the faculty. And they're not really thinking about that right now. They will at some point, but they're not there yet, generally speaking. Whether an admissions officer likes what they see on an AP exam or not, that's just a general impression. That's a separate subject. Thank you, Ned. Subject tests are 1 hour long, multiple choice tests in various subjects out of an 800-point scale. And in the last 2.5 months, we can now say that literally 0 colleges in the country require subject tests of every applicant. That wasn't true 2.5, 3 months ago. There were a handful. the last hanger on was MIT. Actually, someone asked about that.
Yeah.
And they required 2 subject tests, and then they went all the way from requiring 2 subject tests to not just no longer requiring them, but they refused to look at them. You can send 6 perfect score subject tests. MIT will not look at them. There are other colleges in the country that have the same policy. Ned and I were talking about this earlier today, and he said, why do you think that is? And my first response was, well, they just don't make the College Board enough money. I mean, there are far fewer students sitting for subject tests than there are for AP exams, SATs, PSATs, and they haven't, I don't know, Ned, you would know this. When's the last time they updated subject tests? You don't have to answer, but like, right, they've updated the SAT since they've updated subject tests. And so the College Board is maybe saying goodbye, and perhaps colleges are aware of that. And it's just that, why would they want to create a model to make decisions about applicants using a factor that's not going to be around much longer? So for now, if you're in the class of 2021, 2022, 2023, I'm not saying forget about subject tests. In the spirit of collecting data, it might be something useful to look at if it's an opportunity for you, but they're available still. But to Ned's point about AP exams, I have the same attitude about subject tests. They can help, they can't hurt, because no one's really looking for them, especially if you're in the class of 2021, because they're canceled until August. So if you want to hang on to that US history all summer long and take it in August, go for it. If you don't like your score, don't worry about it, you just don't send it.
And really quickly on that, depending on what peer group your kid is, and you can have students who sort of become, competitive test takers. Well, I took this many subject tests, I took this many APs, and blah, blah, blah. And it can get people a little bit spun up on it. If you had a limited amount of time, resource, and enthusiasm as a family, as your kid, put your eggs in the basket of either SAT or ACT. Try not to get distracted by these other things as much. You're better off really nailing one of those tests and not having these others than kind of spreading your effort widely. And Jeff, by the way, the last update to subject tests, the last structural change, is when they allowed calculators on the math tests.
Wow.
Okay, it's been a while.
And just to end on this slide, we got a question about Georgetown, which has a little bit of notoriety for subject tests because it's the only school I know that strongly recommends 3 subject tests. But in the last year, they relaxed that language. They actually will now take subject tests and AP exams in lieu of those 3 subject tests, some kind of combination. And perhaps what I said earlier has something to do with that. Moving on, we already saw this slide. So what if you're thinking about holistic admissions and you want colleges to know who you are, and one of the things that is part of your experience that's significant to what you've lived through is a pandemic that by definition is global and everyone else has too. Well, just yesterday, the Common App announced that in the application platform, and for those of you who don't know, the Common App is an application platform for, I think, more than 900 colleges and universities in the country, so it's almost certain that you'll use it. They are going to allow for an optional separate question, you see it here in front of you, that asks you, how has coronavirus impacted you or your family? It's going to be a 250-word max. And so if you were impacted, that is where you get to answer, give that information. That is where colleges get to look if they want that information. And you don't have to worry about including it elsewhere or trying to stay away from it elsewhere. It's there for if you need it. But maybe you feel like you don't need it. For some of us, and I hope for a lot of us, I hope for all of you, this has been only frustrating and scary and boring, but you have your health and your family has your employment and you're just doing school online and things are not so dire for you. I hope that's the case, but if that is the case, you might be thinking, well, I don't have anything to put in that coronavirus question. So what am I gonna do about my extracurriculars that are gone? I don't know what to write about for my essay. I don't have any summer plans. Ned just said that my grades are meaningless on the transcript for this semester. What about letters of recommendation, right? I'm online. How am I gonna get great, vivid letters from these teachers who I might not even be seeing if they're not using video function on whatever online platform there is? And my answer is twofold. One, everyone's in the same boat, which doesn't always feel helpful to hear, but it's true. And two, we do what we can with what we have. Right. So let me give you an example of a couple students I've been working with and this question about extracurriculars. I have one student, he was captain of the chess team at his school, and this is mid-March. He goes, well, I guess our chess tournaments are canceled. And I said, you can play chess online, right? You can practice online. You can host a whole tournament online. That's an easy one. You're the captain, go. And off he went, and that's exactly what he did. I have another student who loves ceramics. She loved that class, and she doesn't have a ceramic studio in her home, but she found online, to her parents' chagrin, that there's a way of turning a ceiling fan into a pottery wheel. So she just disassembled the ceiling fan.
I'm going to do this, Jeff. I have a ceiling fan. I don't even like it.
Disassembled the ceiling fan in her bedroom and turned it into a pottery wheel. And so she's making pottery in her garage. And there are so many out of the box, creative, original things that any one of you could still be doing. So the question I ask students is, you know, when we get on the other side of this pandemic, whatever that's going to look like, and someone were to ask you, how do you remember that time? What did you do with the time you had? Is your answer Netflix? Or did you think of ways to follow your passions, pursue your academic interests, or be useful to others? My last example of another student who's doing something pretty cool is that he's into fashion, and so he has asked his neighbors to leave clothing that they don't want anymore on their porch. He's picking them up safely, socially distanced, mask, all that stuff, bringing it into his home, disinfecting it, and enhancing it, right? Like doing some kind of tailor wizardry to it, and then putting it on an Etsy shop to raise funds for an organization. And it's just so cool. And so there are extracurriculars for you. They might not be lacrosse practice, but there are things that you can still do with your time.
And related to that, Jeff, we got a question about, do you have a sense of what schools might do for applicants that require auditions or other in-person visits for specialized programs? For that type of thing, generally there are ways to basically send a recording, right? So my son's a theater guy, and they asked him to do, you know, 2-minute monologues, two 1-minute monologues, excuse me, and you can record them. Just you have your mom or dad or your friend, in this case, friend did it, just with an iPhone, and you just send that in. Because again, keep in mind that colleges they want athletes to show up, and they want musicians to show up, and they want, you know, ceramicists, is that the word, to show up. They want all these things, right? And so in the same ways that we are trying, and you're trying to be creative and entrepreneurial and innovative in figuring out how do you present yourself, colleges doing this, they're doing the same thing. They're trying to reach out to you and find other ways, because again, keep in mind, they want you to show up, and they also don't, you know, they want to have all these different needs met. So it will, of course, be incredibly individualized. So this is where, you know, your sons or daughters and mom and dad can be helping this process to go online and find out what those folks are doing. And to go back to the point that Jeff made, you know, to even reach out to the theater department, or if it's not a professor, even the administrator there, the administrative assistant there, and say, hey, I was going to come and visit you, but what do I do now? You're starting a conversation. You're getting help, but at the same time, you're demonstrating interest. And so when you come around that, oh, we remember that girl, man, she was really neat. She's the one who had the ceiling fan, or whatever it happens to be. So in the same time that you're looking for help, it's an opportunity to build relationships there. And really quickly, someone asked about this. If you don't send if you don't send an ACT or an SAT, will colleges assume that it was terrible? No, they won't. But, you know, tradition, and again, it depends on the college, but for the most highly selective colleges, I mean, if you were Bowdoin or Chicago and you're in this test score option, but you don't send in the score, they're probably not going to assume that it's the top of the pile. They're not going to assume it's terrible, but they're probably going to assume it's somewhere in the middle. But again, this is highly individualized. I would always say, take the test if you can. And if it's good enough, then you send it off. If you're not sure if it's good enough, send Jeff an email, talk to your counselor at school. From my perspective, we are always trying to maximize opportunities, maximize options, including taking these infernal standardized exams.
And just to wrap this slide up with to hit on a few of these other points, this summer, we're in a wait and see kind of mode. You might have plans that are not technically canceled yet, especially if they're later in the summer. You might have plans that have been moved to online. And what I've been telling my students is to come up with a contingency plan. Let's assume that social distancing, shelter in place is happening all the way through summer. None of us wants that, but let's assume, what are some of the things that you can do on your own, cobble that together to create a structure for yourself that requires self-discipline, that requires independence, but that would be interesting and fun for you. And for some students, that means that maybe they were involved in an organization or a club, let's say the student newspaper. And they're not gonna be able to work on a student newspaper in the summer. The school is closed down, but that doesn't mean that those students can't have a writers group where they share their writing with each other and comment on it in a structured way over the summer. For other students who have an academic interest, there are free online college courses through Coursera.org, edX.org. I'm even asking some of my students to reach out to professors at universities of their interest, or even looking at community college courses that they can audit or even take for credit, and just seeing what's available. And then there are a number of summer programs that would have been in person, but they are committed to still hosting these programs online, and you can check those out as well. There is no one thing that's better than another. It all comes down to what value did it add to your life as a student? How did it inform your next steps, whether it's an academic pathway or a purpose or mission you have in your own life, and did it further you along on your path?
And one quick point on that, it's so easy, particularly for students, to think that the work of high school is building a resume. Right? That the most important outcome of high school is where do they go to college. And I say this as a test prep guy and Jeff is a college counselor, but remember that they're trying to build a life. Right? They're trying to build a life. And so when you talk about what activities, well, in a perfect world, kids are doing things outside of the classroom that really align with what they're most interested in. And in a perfect world, right, there's some overlap between the things that they love to do in school and the things in the classroom and out of the classroom, right? So for young women who love math and science, right, and think I want to do engineering, well, goodness, you're going to try to do something in the summer that connects with engineering, because colleges, and this is a little bit of a cynical take in colleges, but they're kind of interested in who's going to make them rich or make them famous, right? And so people who are really passionate about whatever they're into, right, is a great thing to do, right? Is Jeff's chess guy going to become a world champion? I don't know, maybe, but if he does, you can better believe that Maryland or Marymount is going to take credit for that, right? Your fashionista guy who's trying to do the Jose Andres of food, of clothing, not only he's this service-driven kid, which is so cool, but he's also got this wonderful, artistic passion, right? And is he going to go to Parsons, or is he going to go to, I don't know what he's going to do with it, but he's building that now, as opposed to all this doing school, and then figure out later what we're going to do with our lives. We really, and I love, Jeff, your point of this, of if after 6 weeks or 6 months, or God help us, 16 months of this, say, what did I do with this? If this is a time when so many things are off the table, for kids to actually authentically pay attention to what gives joy to them, what feels meaningful to them, and give them as much runway as they can safely have to really dig into that. Not only does it make that a great use of their time, but it's likely to build on paper the thing that makes that kid really compelling when it's finally put in the front of a college admissions officer.
That's the right order of things. Incidentally, living authentically happens to look good for college admissions, right? So let's also remember that we're each, human, and we're living in a tough time. What does it look like to cope with coronavirus and go to college, or have a student or a child of your own go to college? I mean, what are some of your suggestions, Ned?
Oh, I mean, obviously one of the things that everyone is really concerned about is one, kids being successful, but also mental health, right? And there's some of you may know, I co-wrote a book called The Self-Driven Child with a friend Bill Stixcher, who's a clinical neuropsychologist. And we look at, among other things, the sort of escalated incidence of stress-related disorders for young people, so anxiety and depression, and it's really a big deal. And there's a lot to say on it, but one of the things that can be really helpful is to have a plan, and I'll add to that a plan B, right? Because we all have our idea of how things are going to work out, and sometimes they don't. And if you feel like, you know, overstated, but there's a story in our book, if you feel like it's Yale or McDonald's, that's a terrible space to live in, right? If you know, go for Yale, goodness, it's a wonderful place. I understand they make terrific locks. I'm teasing for all the Yaleys out there. But then if Yale doesn't come together, what's a place that's like Yale that's a half step less competitive, right? We want to think about that for college admissions. But we also want to plan that for kids who are going off to college, that they have a plan, and you can sit there and almost make up a contingency plan for if this would happen, what would you do? If this would happen, what would you do? And this can be really soothing to you as a parent to think, oh my gosh, she actually does have she has a plan for that. I don't have to worry about this. I know that there's a plan. But also knowing that there are some kids who are by their wiring a little bit more anxious, and it may be helpful to them as well to have a plan for things. One of the things that we know, one of the most difficult times for kids is the start of college. This is why these universities want to have things in person, not online, because they can see and watch and wrap their arms around them and make them feel taken care of. Paul Tough in his book talks about belonging uncertainty. And that's one of the things that's so unsettling, that you go from being a senior in high school, knowing who you are, knowing who your friends are, knowing where you eat lunch, right? Knowing what your activities, knowing what your classes are. And you get to college and everything is up in there. You can take whatever you want. You don't know who these people are. I mean, blah, blah, blah. And it makes people really vulnerable, but both in a good way and in a bad way. Okay, in a bad way, because where do I sit, you know, in the cafeteria? But in a good way, it makes them open to having their minds change, to be open to new experiences. However, knowing that this is going to be college unlike any other, I would suggest planning now. Think about who is on your kid's team. So a lot of kids in this area have therapists. Awesome. Plan to have meetings scheduled now. I don't know if I'll need them. It doesn't matter. Plan to meet with Dr. So-and-so. I'd much rather have that scheduled the second Thursday that you're there, just so you have someone to touch base with. Because sometimes kids, you know, they don't want to tell mom or dad that, oh my gosh, it's going terribly, because they're worried that you'll be upset. But also, this college thing, the reason you want your kids to be on college and the reason they want to be on college is the huge, like, liminal stage of their individuating away from mom and dad. And so if things aren't going so hot, they really, in a perfect world, they're helping themselves, they're looking for help around them. Not that they're not calling mom and dad, but we would love for them to start to build a team that's not just them. So again, if they have a therapist, if they're working with the fabulous Jeff Knox, schedule a half-hour, 15-minute appointment just to touch base, and Jeff can say, it's great, you go out, but sleep a little bit more, because that'll be good for you. But kind of build those things in, because a lot of times we know that when kids become anxious, the dominant manifestation of anxiety is avoidance. And so they avoid going to class, they avoid asking for help. So build that help in now. And then hope that they don't need it. But if they do need it, know that it's there. And then Jeff, you want to talk about resource on campus, a really important point as well.
Yeah, as you're doing your research on college options, one of the things you might look at are, you know, not just the academic resources or how big the class size is, but in terms of counseling options, affinity groups. You know, what's available for your own mental health, your social life, and how can you take advantage of them? In some cases, schools build that in already to the tuition. It's just there, you just use it, and so just knowing that that's there can make things feel a lot just safer and there's more comfort.
Right.
So we're gonna start wrapping up with some big ideas. And I love this last question that I see that came through. Is it our sense that admissions in general will be more competitive for selective colleges in the class of 2021? And that I would replace the word competitive with, I don't know what, but perhaps unpredictable or arbitrary or complicated. But the way I think about preparing an application for college admissions is actually the second point here, the serenity prayer. You know what you're in control of, and you do your very best to create experiences for yourself, build a self-awareness with introspection and reflection, and then articulate that to the best of your ability to a college, and do, you know, on the nuts and bolts of testing and your grades and all that. You send that over and then let it go and let the college admissions office do what they're going to do with it, because you're really not in control of that. What I want for all of my students is to be able to look back on this process of going through high school and going through the college admissions process and say, I wouldn't have done anything differently. I'm proud of how I handled each step of this process. And whatever the results are, and I hope they're plentiful, those are the results. We plan plans, not the results. And so that is the serenity prayer. What are we in control and what are we not in control of? Grace and compassion are buzzwords that have been thrown around by college admissions officers almost unanimously. It's almost every time I talk to someone, they use these words. And it's just a reminder that these are humans and they're doing their very best to work with us, with you, through this process. And we're all in this together. Everyone is experiencing this pandemic in their own way, but in some way, we all are. And it's important to remember that what you hear, even from Ned or me today, might not be true as soon as you log off this webinar. So it's important to stay up to date, keep your ears open. If you need help, that's what we're here for. We do this for a living. So reach out to us and we can give you some good information. Of course, there are other resources that you probably have available to you as well. And we're all just rolling with the punches. And so as that new information comes, like Ned said, plan A, B, maybe C, D, E, right? We know how we're going, to the best of our ability, pivot when we have to. And we've already said, do what you can with what you have. No one is expecting you to rise beyond what you're able to do, but look for those opportunities. If you have some extra space in your life to manage some of the things that Ned and I talked about with you today, well, that's your job. I'm talking to you, students.
And I would add to that, I mean, because, you know, doing something always feels better than doing nothing, right? Most people kind of prefer to do something. What we really want to do is, in addition to focusing on the process rather than the outcome, and I talk about that all the time in test prep, because we know, much like with sports, right? If you have fantastic process, if you have really good form, the outcome is going to come together. When you're thinking about the outcome, then you kind of botch the process and then everything's not so happy. But also, because everything is so uncertain and so topsy-turvy, we simply want to focus on the things that we can do, not the things that we cannot do, right? Because there's some things that are just opportunities denied to us, right? No one's going to have a final tournament, you know, for any sport this year. There's so many things that disappeared, and we're allowed to mourn for those, we're allowed to be upset, but only for a period. And then we really need to turn our attention to what can we do? You know, when we do this online in the best way that we can, because planning for things and engaging the things that we can do feels so much better than sitting there sort of passively, helplessly, hopelessly waiting for life to come back online or offline, I guess I'd say, right?
We sincerely hope that you found this useful today. And assuming that you did, we're going to do it again in 2 weeks, Wednesday, May 27th at noon, not at night. This is going to be at noon. We're going to host a town hall with admissions leaders from University of Maryland and Tulane University. And then 2 weeks after that, we're going to do something else. 2 weeks after that, we're going to do something else. And as we see topics that are important and interesting, we're going to touch on those. So stay tuned. This webinar was recorded. You will receive a link to that recording in the next few days. And you also will receive invitations to these upcoming town halls.
Thanks so much for being here. Again, our job is to help you be informed so that you can help your kids move forward in the directions, get them to the place they want them to be. It's not an easy time, but certainly, you know, all of us are looking for help from every corner that we get, and to the degree that we can, we want to keep providing that to you and to your kids. Get a lot extra sleep, wash your hands, and maybe we'll see you guys in a couple of weeks. Thanks.
Good night, everyone.